I was in the bar with my mother and our friends at about 11 p.m. when the ship's alarm sounded. Many people ignored it. They thought it was just a practice, but it wasn't. My mother and I returned to our cabin to gather a few belongings, but Sylvia and Eileen remained in the bar. They didn't think it was anything serious. We reported to our lifeboat station. We grabbed heavy cardigans and coats, but I was still wearing my chiffon cocktail dress, cocktail coat and bracelet. It was terrifying. When they lowered the lifeboats, which each held 40 people, some tilted sideways, tipping passengers into the sea. Luckily, our lifeboat was lowered down reasonably well. When it hit the water, we all had to row. I rowed, as did my mother and an 8-year-old boy in front of us who had never rowed before. We had a real job rowing away from the ship. It took 2 hours. That's because the Lakonia was listing to one side and appeared to be still moving. Once we finally felt that we were far enough away, all we could do was sit in silence in the darkness and watch the ship ablaze. We heard a couple more explosions. We sat and prayed, reciting the Lord's Prayer, as we all knew people were still on the ship. There were cries for help which were difficult to listen to, as there was nothing you could do. It was like a film set, except it was real.
These are the words of Pauline Moore, who survived the night of the 22nd of December, 1963. Instead of a pleasant holiday excursion, she found herself adrift in a lifeboat, cold and afraid, and wondering if she would survive the night. The fiery last voyage of the Lakonia, today on Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs. Hello and welcome to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, tales of mishaps, misfortune, and misadventure. I'm your host, Rich Napolitano. Thank you so much for listening. Today I bring you the story of the Greek cruise ship Lakonia, spelled with a K, which met its end in 1963. This is a completely different ship and story from the RMS Lakonia, spelled with a C, in 1942. Our story begins with the Netherlands Line, which was formed in 1870 to trade between Northern Europe and the Dutch East Indies, or what is now Indonesia. It launched its first ship in 1871, becoming a successful shipping company over the next few decades. By the 1920s, the Netherlands Line was renowned for its high quality and reliable ships. After the successful launch of the vessel Christian Huygens in 1928, the company promptly ordered 2 more ships. The first of these 2 ships was laid down at yard number 194 in June of 1928 at the Dutch Shipbuilding Company, and launched in April of 1929 as the Johan van Oldenbarnevelt, referred to as the JVO. Later the same year came its sister ship, the Marnix van St. Aldegonde. Overall, they were the 89th and 90th ships built by the Netherlands Line. The JVO, as built, was 586 feet long, 75 feet wide, and had a gross tonnage of over 19,000. She was the largest Dutch ship ever built at that time. She commenced her sea trials in March of 1930 and performed tremendously well. She sailed from Amsterdam and into the North Sea, maxing out at 19 knots, and experienced no vibrations. After the successful trial, she was ready to be put into service as an ocean liner. The JVO featured accommodations for 4 classes of passengers: a luxurious first class, an impressive second class, a simple but comfortable third class, and a fairly rustic fourth class. First, second, and third class cabins were interchangeable, allowing for flexible arrangements, and could carry 770 passengers and 360 crew. Its 7 passenger decks were beautifully decorated by artist Karel Adolf Leon Cachet and sculptor Lambertus Schale. Interior spaces were filled with tropical teakwood carvings, marble sculptures, metalwork, fabrics, and tapestries. A vast amount of space was offered on board, providing an enhanced level of comfort for its passengers. An indoor-outdoor pool complete with dressing rooms and showers, a poolside bar, and a unique retractable glass roof was a popular spot for guests. A spacious sun deck was available for lounging, and a sports deck with ping pong, shuffleboard, and other games provided for recreation. First-class passengers with children could take advantage of the children's playroom and nursery. The promenade deck allowed passengers to chat and socialize in the exquisitely decorated lounge, with the opulent first-class smoking room overlooking the ship's bow. The reading and writing room, called the Ebony Room, was a beautiful space, appointed with ebony and marble, a decorated ceiling, and electric lights and fans. A dark wood grand staircase allowed passage from decks B through F, and there was even a passenger elevator. But the centerpiece of the ship's interior was the Grand Social Hall. It featured a stunning hammered copper ceiling, ornate wood carvings on the walls, solid teak doors, stained glass windows, and stainless steel chandeliers. An immense tapestry even covered the entirety of one wall. The JVO was one of, if not the most elegant ship on the water in 1930. While first and second class passengers were treated to such luxuries, third and fourth class passengers had more standard accommodations. But they were clean and comfortable, with bunk-style rooms for 4 to 16 people. A contemporary photo of a fourth-class cabin even shows a table with fresh flowers in the middle of the cabin. The JVO departed on her maiden voyage on the 6th of May, 1930, under the command of Captain G. Croit. Departing from Amsterdam, hundreds of family, friends, and onlookers on shore waved and shouted as the impressive liner began its voyage to the Dutch East Indies. But her maiden voyage proved to be disappointing. While in the North Sea Canal, before even making it to the open waters, the Dutch freighter Regastrom collided with the JVO, damaging her port bow. The ship was forced to return to Amsterdam to undergo repairs, which commenced immediately. Within just 3 days, the ship was repaired and was once again seaworthy. On May 9, 1930, her second attempt at a maiden voyage was underway, and this time, there were no such problems. The JVO passed through the North Sea, into the English Channel, and made its first stop at Southampton, to much celebration. She continued on, visiting many more ports along the way, including Algiers, Genoa, and Port Said, finally reaching Surabaya on the island of Java, right on schedule. For the next 9 years, the JVO serviced this route between Europe and the Dutch East Indies, as well as an occasional pleasure cruise to Scandinavia. Its sister ship, the Marnix van St. Aldegonde, and the other ships of the Netherlands Line proved to be highly successful throughout the 1930s. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, triggering the outbreak of World War II, and the world changed. Pleasure cruises and ocean travel came to a halt. The war forced ocean liners into service as troop and supply ships, and the JVO was no exception. She was refitted and repurposed into a troop carrier, with a capacity for 4,000 troops. Throughout the war, the JVO transported Allied troops to European and Asian ports without incident. Her sister ship was also converted into a troop ship, but her fate was not as fortunate. In 1943, the Marnix was attacked by German torpedo bombers and sank in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Algiers. Following World War II, the JVO continued as a troop carrier during the Indonesian War of Independence, carrying Dutch troops between Europe and Indonesia. In the 1950s, the JVO returned to passenger service, mostly servicing the route between Europe and Australia. By the 1960s, jumbo jet air travel emerged as a faster and more convenient method of travel, and popularity of ocean liners steadily and quickly declined. Many passenger ship lines were forced to sell off their fleet as a result. While ocean travel dwindled, cruise lines began to flourish. Working-class families could now afford to take pleasure cruises and budget holidays, and cruising became a favorite option to get away to warmer places and take an affordable holiday. Cruise line companies took advantage of the many ocean liners being put up for sale, and despite being 33 years old, the JVO was still a beautiful and luxurious ship, and so was an attractive option. In 1963, the JVO was sold to the Ormos Shipping Company, owner of the General Steam Navigation Company of Greece, more commonly referred to as the Greek Line. The JVO was immediately sent to Genoa, Italy, and underwent renovations and upgrades. Her funnels were repainted a striking blue and yellow to match the colors of the Greek line, with a shining white hull. She was renamed to Lakonia and became the flagship of the Greek line. The twin-screw motor ship Lakonia was relaunched into service in April of 1963, and passengers delighted in her comforts and beauty. Despite being Greek-owned, she was based in Southampton, England, and the renovated cruise ship became extremely popular with British tourists. The Greek line advertised its pleasure cruises on the Lakonia with slogans such as, "Here is a holiday you will remember and talk about for the rest of your life." Her route took her to ports including Lisbon, Tangier, and Cadiz, Spain. In the early morning hours of the 19th of December, 1963, the Lakonia was preparing for departure on a cruise to the Canary Islands, with stops at Madeira, Tenerife, and Las Palmas. Docked alongside her that morning was the much larger RMS Queen Elizabeth. The Lakonia departed Southampton with 651 passengers and 390 crew under the command of 53-year-old Captain Mataios Zarbas, an experienced captain who had been with the Greek line for 15 years. The Lakonia had been inspected a week before, on December 13th, by British inspectors, and it passed on all counts. The ship was deemed to be in excellent condition, with all necessary safety equipment in order. This inspection will later come into question. On the first day of the voyage, Captain Zarbas staged a fire drill for the passengers to be aware of proper procedures, but this was mostly ignored or treated lightly. 27-year-old passenger Chris Smallbone recalled later that he was the only passenger to show up at his assigned lifeboat station. Even the ship's crew made little effort, only turning on the siren and showing up at the lifeboat. But no instructions were ever given to passengers, and the passengers just went back to enjoying their day. Cruise director George Herbert was busy planning activities for the passengers. Guests casually walked the spacious promenade deck, enjoyed games such as shuffleboard, and socialized in the lounges, bars, and the Agora shopping center at the stern of the ship. With Christmas just a few days away, and the weather superb, the mood was festive and relaxed. Although the Lakonia was beautiful and luxurious, there were problems underneath the repainted and upgraded veneer, as the guts of the ship were over 30 years old. The crew experienced several electrical issues and short circuits during the first days at sea, but these were known and common, having reoccurred since the Greek line bought the 33-year-old ship. Thus far, they had been mere annoyances and nothing serious, so no issue was made of it. The Lakonia was equipped with the most modern of safety equipment at that time. An automatic fire alarm system was installed which could detect smoke, and there were 2 fire stations with firefighting equipment. The bridge featured a panel to indicate the location of any fire. On the 22nd of December, the Lakonia was 250 miles west of Gibraltar, bound for Madeira. The captain's tropical tramp's ball was in full swing in the ornate Statesman Lounge, which went late into the evening. At 11 o'clock p.m., some reported the smell of smoke, but it was dismissed as cigar smoke. Around the same time, the panel on the bridge lit up, indicating a fire in the hair salon, and the fire alarm rang out. When 2 of the ship's stewards noticed smoke coming from under the door of the hair salon, they opened the door to check inside. Flames erupted out of the salon as the fresh supply of oxygen allowed the fire to race quickly down the passageways and spread to other parts of the ship. The 2 stewards quickly retrieved fire extinguishers, but the fire was far too intense for them to have any effect. One of the stewards rushed to inform the ship's purser, Antonio Baghetti, while the other stayed behind to continue to fight the fire. Baghetti quickly gathered a half a dozen crewmen and raced to the fire, but soon realized they could do nothing to prevent the fire from spreading. The fire in the salon had been smoldering for a full 30 minutes before being discovered, as the salon had been closed for the evening. The ship's carpeted floors and varnished wood paneling were highly flammable, aiding the fire to spread quickly. The fire alarm rang out, as it should, however it was not loud enough for all to hear. One passenger described the bell as that used to call for tea. The hair salon was located directly below the Statesman Lounge, where the Tropical Tramp's Ball was taking place. but the hundreds inside did not hear the fire alarm above the music, singing, and dancing. In the movie theater, aft of the Statesman Lounge, the film Call Me Buona, starring Bob Hope and Anita Ekberg, was being screened. Chris Smallbone was in the theater when he heard the sound of an alarm. At first, he and others believed the sound was coming from the movie. But after a few moments, they could smell smoke and nervously exited the theater. Almost none of the crew, or even the captain, knew what was happening yet. Finally, a member of the crew reached Captain Zarbus, who was judging a costume contest in the Statesman Lounge. The captain was informed of the fire, and he hastily excused himself from his guests. He could just barely make out the sound of the alarm through the noise, and raced to the bridge to use the PA system to make an announcement. But the fire had already damaged the ship's electrical system, knocking out the PA. By this time it was 11:30 p.m., and still many on board were unaware of the fire. Some were asleep in their cabins, unaware of the fire or the alarm. Captain Zarbus instructed the ship's radio operator, Antonios Kalogridis, to send out a distress call. Moments later, the message was sent. Fire aboard. Immediate assistance, please. This message was received by the radio operator aboard the Argentine vessel Salta. After determining the Lakonia's position, the radio operator immediately informed his captain, and the Salta began moving toward the Lakonia. But it would be several hours before the Salta could arrive on the scene. A rising sense of danger and urgency gripped the passengers and crew alike. The fire had by now quite noticeably spread and was blazing out of control. Smoke was pouring through the ship's ventilation system, reaching all parts of the ship. Concerned for his 3-year-old son, Jeffrey, passenger George Chapman grabbed a gas mask and attempted to make his way down to his cabin to retrieve the boy. He recalled, "I thought if I had to die, I wanted to die with our baby. Halfway down, I saw an engineer coming up through the smoke with Jeffrey in his arms. That man saved his life." Flames had finally reached the ballroom, causing great concern and anxiety among the guests as smoke filled the room. Cruise director George Herbert still was uncertain of exactly what was happening, but seeing the fire and smoke guided the guests out of the ballroom into the ship's lifeboats. Shortly after midnight, the Lakonia's radio operator sent another distress call. "We are leaving the ship. Please immediately give us assistance. Please help us." At this time, 6 ships were on their way to aid the Lakonia, including the Salta, but it would take hours for them to arrive. Another message was sent at 12:22 a.m. SOS from Lakonia. Last time. I cannot stay any more in the wireless cabin. We are leaving the ship. Please help immediately. That was the last radio transmission from the Lakonia. 3,000 miles away, a United States Coast Guard station picked up the distress call. The information was fed into a computer, which produced the names of all vessels in the area, and messages were sent to the Argentine vessel Salta, a Belgian merchant ship Charleville, British freighters Montcalm and Stratheden, and the Brazilian freighter Rio Grande. At 1:00 a.m., the ship's purser, Antonio Baghetti, gave the order to abandon ship, as confused passengers rushed around nervously. George Herbert organized passengers at the lifeboat stations, and the crew began lowering the boats to the water. But there was a problem. The fresh coats of paint had covered up rusty and rotten equipment, and many of the lifeboats were stuck and could not be lowered. During the lifeboat drill a week prior, only 5 lifeboats were launched. Had they all been launched, it would have been discovered that some were faulty. Englishman Arthur Edson and business partner Les Cull were passengers on the Lakonia, along with their families. They were co-owners of a metals company and were celebrating their 25th year of operation. The men hurried their families into a lifeboat, and Edson jumped in at the last minute. But Les Cull was unable to do so, and the lifeboat was lowered into the water. Adjacent to Edson's lifeboat was lifeboat number 22. As it prepared to be lowered, the lifeboat began experiencing difficulty and was unstable. Edson shouted up to his partner, "Not 22, Les, not 22." Just at that moment, lifeboat 22 tipped over, dumping its occupants, mostly children, into the water. Edson could hear the screams of "Help me" coming from the cold, dark water below, but nothing could be done. Just 3 of the lifeboats burned in the flames, but the old and rusty machinery of the remaining lifeboats continued to be problematic. Only with great effort could the boats be lowered, and some stations were operated by passengers, with no crew available to assist. Some of them smashed violently into the side of the ship, killing some and injuring others. More broke free of their cables, plunging all on board into the water, and to their deaths. As the ship listed to starboard, it became even more difficult to launch the boats. Just 12 of the ship's 24 boats were successfully launched. Any who made it safely to the water in one of them found the oars and drain plugs to be missing, and rotten rudders, making it difficult to steer. However, there were moments of courage and bravery. Some crew members went back below deck to bang on doors and call out to any who remained inside, even breaking down some doors. When they reached the lockers where the life jackets were stored, they found the lockers rusted shut. Those trapped in their cabins opened their portholes and called and waved for help. Anyone already in the lifeboats could see them and hear their cries, but were powerless to help. Some crewmen tied ropes around themselves and were lowered down the side of the ship and brought some of these trapped passengers to the relative safety of the main deck. But all of them would need to get off the ship. The situation on the Lakonia was chaos. Officers shouted contradictory orders, while crew members wandered around confused. Panicked guests looked for guidance and direction, all the while trying to find their loved ones and get into a lifeboat. Fire began pouring out of the ship's sides now, stretching upwards and illuminating the Lakonia like a ghostly visage in the night. Several hundred passengers and crew were still trapped inside the ship, as the fire had blocked their escape. Many were able to make it to the Agora shopping center at the stern of the ship, where they found temporary safety from the fire. But an hour later, the fire reached them, and panic spread. They needed to exit the ship, and the only way out was through the glass windows. Ladders and ropes were thrown out of the Agora's windows, and people began clambering down into the water. Some lost their grip or footing, and fell into the dark sea, 40 feet below. Lieutenant Colonel John Wilkinson and his wife stood in the Agora, nervously discussing what to do. The couple, both in their 60s, decided they should jump from the ship and into the water below. The colonel jumped first, and then his wife. Once in the water, they became separated, and Mrs. Wilkinson never saw her husband again. The gangways on both sides of the ship were lowered, allowing some passengers to make their way off the ship and into the water. Once in the water, they found themselves very close to the struggling ship. The Lakonia pitched up and down and rocked side to side, pulling many people underwater, drowning them. Some were killed when the ship crashed down on them as it rose and fell with the waves. For those watching from the water, the Lakonia was a grisly sight. The once beautiful ship, where they were comfortable and happy just hours ago, was now a flaming hulk, glowing in the pitch-black night. Throughout the early morning hours of December 23rd, survivors in the water struggled to stay alive as the ship continued to burn and slowly sink. Some had life jackets, others found debris to hold onto, while those less fortunate simply floated. At 3:30 a.m., the light of a ship could be seen in the distance. The Argentine vessel Salta had arrived, commanded by Captain Jose Barrera, and discovered survivors and dead bodies scattered in the water for miles. The survivors in the lifeboats quickly made their way to the Salta and safely boarded, while the ship's crew made a plan for retrieving people in the water. 30 minutes later, the British tanker Montcalm arrived, followed by the Belgian ocean liner Charleville. Chris Smallbones survived 3 hours in the frigid water before he was pulled into a lifeboat. Many others were not so lucky, succumbing to exposure before the night was over. By dawn, the Lakonia was still smoldering and smoking as it listed to its starboard side. By late morning, a total of 6 ships were on the scene to assist with the rescue. The United States Air Force Base Lajes in the Azores heard the Lakonia's distress call. 4 C-54 Skymaster aircraft from the United States Air Force were loaded with 42 life rafts, 400 blankets, food, and survival packages. Through the clouds, the plane spotted the Lakonia below, as well as bodies floating in the water, and others in life jackets waving for help. For 12 hours, American aircraft flew missions to drop life rafts and supplies to survivors in the water, saving approximately 75 people in this manner. A member of one flight crew, Ken Fritz, later said, "I couldn't get it out of my mind. This was once a happy ship. I pictured all those people wearing fancy dress and whooping it up on a liner bound for the sun. Now there she was, a burning hulk, and people dying in the water around her." An Avro Shackleton aircraft of the Royal Air Force also assisted by guiding rescue boats to survivors. At 3:30 p.m., a message was broadcast from the Montcalm. "To all ships, number of survivors is now 722. Please, all ships in the vicinity, give immediate assistance. Need all possible assistance. Many bodies in the water." The rescue ships remained nearby, but did not approach too closely out of fear of the ship's fuel oil exploding. But the crew of the Belgian ship Charleville launched a daring rescue attempt. A rescue party boarded a lifeboat, approached the Lakonia, and then boarded the burning ship. There, they found Captain Zarbus, who survived the night, and he was the last person taken off the Lakonia. In total, 894 survivors were rescued, approximately 500 by the Salta. 128 were killed, including 95 passengers and 33 crew. It is estimated that 53 of the dead perished in the fire. Survivors were taken on the rescue ships to Madeira and Casablanca, where preparations were made to return them home. After arriving in Funchal, many survivors angrily told of the crew's panic, confusion, and incompetence. Many claim the lifeboats were filled entirely with crew members, and they abandoned the passengers to fend for themselves. Claims of looting were also reported, but these could have stemmed from seeing crew members breaking down doors to help passengers escape their cabins. On the 24th of December, the Dutch tug Hercules, the Portuguese tug Praia da Adraga, and two other tugs attached tow lines to the still smoldering Lakonia. The Greek line hoped to tow the Lakonia to Gibraltar and salvage whatever was left of her. The tugs churned slowly toward Gibraltar, but the sea proved to be rough. On December 29th, Lakonia began to list even further to starboard, and the tow lines were removed. Lakonia capsized and then sank in just 3 minutes, about 250 miles west of Gibraltar. The fire and subsequent sinking of the Lakonia shocked the world. Life magazine published color photographs of the ship as it burned and subsequently sank. It was only the second time in history that a media agency provided coverage of a maritime disaster. The Greek Merchant Marine Ministry launched a 2-year investigation following the sinking. The investigative board determined that the Lakonia should not have passed its inspection, as lifeboats and lifeboat davits were rusted, painted over, and not in working order. They criticized the lifeboat drill from the week prior, as not all lifeboats were launched and tested. Many of the lifeboats lacked drain plugs, causing their occupants to continually bail water. The board was also critical of the late order to abandon ship, and the lack of supervision provided by crew members on deck. The cause of the fire was determined to be a short circuit due to faulty wiring. Captain Zarbus, his first officer, and chief security officer were charged with gross negligence, while 5 other officers were charged with negligence. Zarbus tearfully denied the charges, saying, "There was no panic aboard my ship, neither among the crew nor among the passengers. My crew did not try to jump into the lifeboats ahead of the passengers." A class action lawsuit was filed against the Greek line by survivors and families of the victims of the Lakonia. However, the company filed for bankruptcy in 1975 and ceased operations. That is going to do it for the fiery last voyage of the Lakonia. Thank you so much for listening. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is written, edited, and produced by me, Rich Napolitano. Please remember to follow the show on social media at ShipwrecksPod or at shipwrecksandseadogs.com. Original theme music is by Sean Siegfried. You can follow Sean at seansiegfried.com. Thank you so much to all my supporters on buymeacoffee.com. If you would like to make a one-time donation and support the show, you may do so at buymeacoffee.com/shipwreckspod. You can also help support the show by subscribing to Into History. Your subscription will give you ad-free access to this and many other great history podcasts, as well as early access and a private Discord forum. Please join me again next time, but until then, don't forget to wear your life jackets.